Have you ever had someone call 911 on you while you were sitting on your own porch, drinking your morning coffee? It's a special kind of violation, a unique blend of absurd and infuriating. Now, imagine they made that call completely unaware that you not only own the porch they're trying to kick you off of, but you also own the land under their feet, the road they drove in on, the entire communications network their call is traveling over, and, for all practical purposes, the very police department they're summoning. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because this is the story of how my obsessive need for privacy collided with an HOA president's psychotic need for control, and how she learned a very, very public lesson about who's really in charge. Her name was Diane, and she was the queen of a little kingdom called the Pinnacle View Estates HOA. She thought my quiet lake cabin was an unsightly blight on her perfect world. She had no idea her perfect world was just a small, rented corner of mine. To understand how this happened, you have to understand the town of Serenity Falls, except that's not its real name. For nearly 100 years, it was Argentum Falls, a gritty mining town built around one of the richest silver lodes in the state. My great-grandfather actually worked in that mine. But when the silver ran out in the late 90s, the mining company packed up and the town died a slow death. The population dwindled to less than 200 souls. Buildings fell into disrepair. It became a ghost town with a heartbeat. That's when I came in. I'd spent 20 years in tech, building a software company from my dorm room into a global entity. I sold it, made more money than any person has a right to, and found myself burned out and deeply disillusioned with the endless noise of modern life. I wanted peace. I wanted to build something real, something tangible. So, through a series of shell corporations and a parent holding company I named Northlight Assets, I bought the whole town. I bought the defunct mining charter, which included deeds to over 30,000 acres of surrounding mountain land, including the old mine itself, the mineral rights, and a stunning alpine lake. I bought every commercial building downtown, the shuttered movie theater, the crumbling hotel, the rusting grain silos. I bought all the residential lots that had been abandoned or seized for back taxes. I spent the next 5 years and a significant portion of my fortune resurrecting it. We didn't just renovate, we rebuilt. We laid miles of fiber optic cable. We refurbished the old hydroelectric dam in the mountains to power the town with clean energy. We created a municipal charter, established a city council, and hired a city manager. We turned Argentum Falls into Serenity Falls, a quiet, sustainable, high-tech haven for people who wanted to escape the rat race. And the best part? My corporation, Northlight, retained ownership of all the core infrastructure, the land, the utilities, the roads. The town government leased it from me. It was the ultimate private community, disguised as a quaint mountain town. I was the invisible, benevolent landlord of an entire city. My only personal indulgence in all of this was the cabin. It was an old hunting cabin built by my great-grandfather on a secluded peninsula on the lake, miles from the main town. It was rustic, made of hand-hewn logs, with a huge stone fireplace and no neighbors. It was my sanctuary, my one place to be completely anonymous. I was just the quiet guy in the old cabin, a rumor to the new residents of the town I had built for them, and it was perfect, until the Pinnacle View Estates HOA decided I was in their jurisdiction. The Pinnacle was an unfortunate historical footnote. Back in the 80s, before the mine went bust, the original mining company had sold off a single 200-acre parcel on the far side of the lake to a luxury developer. This developer built a small, exclusive enclave of McMansions and then went bankrupt. It was the one piece of land I didn't own. The residents there formed an HOA, a fortress of beige conformity in my world of rugged individualism. And their president, their duly elected empress, was Diane Crawford. Diane was a woman who had peaked in her role as head of the high school prom committee and had been trying to recreate that level of absolute power ever since. She drove a pristine, menacingly quiet Porsche Cayenne and had a haircut you could set your watch to. She saw the world through a lens of rules, violations, and, most importantly, threats to her community's property values. And from the deck of her ostentatious glass and steel mansion, she could just barely see my little log cabin across the water. And she hated it. It was old. It was made of wood that wasn't a pre-approved shade. It had a column of real smoke coming from its chimney instead of a clean gas-powered flame feature. It was authentic. And in Diane's world, authenticity was a violation. Her first salvo was a letter, arriving in an aggressively elegant cream-colored envelope. It informed me that my outbuilding was not in compliance with the Pinnacle View architectural guidelines. It listed citations for unapproved siding, the logs, non-conforming roofing materials, the tin roof, and a general lack of aesthetic cohesion with the community. It demanded I submit plans for a complete remodel within 30 days, or face a fine of $500 per week. I laughed, wrote, "Not in your jurisdiction" in red pen on the letter, and mailed it back to her. This was, I would learn, like telling a volcano it's being a bit loud. It doesn't listen, and it's probably about to get a whole lot louder. This simple act of defiance set in motion a chain of events that would end with Diane making the worst and most satisfyingly stupid phone call of her life. My returned letter seemed to have broken something in Diane's brain. She simply could not process the concept of a boundary to her power. Her follow-up was even more astounding. It was a formal invoice for $20 in unpaid annual HOA dues and an additional $500 fine for failure to respond to a board directive. The accompanying letter, dripping with passive aggression, explained that all properties with a view of or access to the lake were automatically subject to Pinnacle View oversight to preserve the unique character and value of our community. It was a legal fantasy, a work of pure fiction. It would be like the city of Paris sending a bill to London because you can technically see France from the English coast on a clear day. I passed the letter along to my legal team at Northlight Assets. Their response was swift and merciless. They sent the HOA a letter that was the legal equivalent of a tactical nuclear strike. It quoted property law, cited the exact metes and bounds of their 200-acre plot from the county registrar, and helpfully included a high-resolution satellite map with their property outlined in red, and my cabin shown to be nearly a mile outside that line. It concluded by stating that any further communication of a harassing or financially demanding nature would be met with a lawsuit for which Northlight Assets would seek full legal costs and punitive damages. For most normal people, this would have been the end. A corporate law firm telling you to back off is usually a pretty clear signal. But Diane was not most people. She was an ideologue. She believed in the righteousness of her cause, which was making the entire world look like the cover of a home and garden magazine. This is where her enablers came in. The Pinnacle HOA board was composed of 3 other people who either lived in fear of Diane's wrath or shared her delusional sense of entitlement. There was a retired dentist who always looked terrified, a stockbroker who clearly just wanted to be part of the ruling class, and a woman who seemed to be Diane's loyal, unblinking lieutenant. Together, they formed a tiny echo chamber of arrogance. In their world, the letter from my lawyers wasn't a warning, it was a challenge. They saw Northlight Assets as some anonymous, out-of-state corporation that was trying to bully them. They had no idea it was the guy in the cabin they were trying to evict. Their next move was to escalate from paper to direct action. They amended their own bylaws in an emergency meeting. The new rule, which they posted on their community bulletin board, declared any undeveloped or non-conforming structure on the lake's shoreline to be abandoned public nuisance property, subject to immediate seizure and removal by the HOA for the betterment of the community. They were, in effect, giving themselves permission to steal my cabin. I learned about this from Ben, the city manager I had hired to run Serenity Falls. Ben was a sharp, no-nonsense guy in his 50s, who had previously managed a much larger city in Oregon. He called me, his voice a mixture of amusement and concern. "Mr. North," he said. He always called me by the pseudonym I used for my public-facing corporate identity. You might want to be aware that the ladies and gentlemen over at the Pinnacle have declared war on your cabin. He emailed me a photo of the new bylaw notice. I told him to just keep an eye on things. I was still operating under the assumption that this was all just posturing, a performance for their own benefit. I truly didn't believe they would be foolish enough to actually set foot on my property. Once again, I had underestimated the awesome power of suburban delusion. The breaking point came on a perfect Saturday morning in October. The air was crisp, the leaves were at their peak color, and I was on my porch, reading a book and enjoying a rare moment of perfect stillness. That stillness was shattered by the sound of tires on the gravel of my private access road. I looked up to see Diane's Porsche Cayenne, followed by a large pickup truck from a local landscaping company. They pulled up about 50 yards from my cabin, and Diane, her lieutenant, and the terrified dentist got out. The stockbroker was conspicuously absent, presumably having reached his limit for crazy. Diane, dressed in what looked like tactical Lululemon, marched toward me, holding a clipboard like a scepter. "Good morning," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "As per the notice posted in accordance with HOA bylaws, we are here to take possession of this abandoned structure." I slowly lowered my book. I looked at her, then at her two followers, then at the two nervous-looking landscapers leaning against their truck. "Diane," I said calmly, "this is private property." "My private property. You are trespassing. I suggest you get back in your car and leave." She let out a short, sharp laugh. "This isn't your property. It's an abandoned blight, and it's part of the common area of Pinnacle View Estates. We have a legal right to be here. Now, you can vacate the premises voluntarily, or we can have you removed." This was the moment of pure, unadulterated hubris. She was standing on land owned by my corporation, on a road maintained by my corporation, trying to seize a building owned by me personally, all while threatening to call the police force funded by my corporation. The sheer magnificent ignorance of it was almost beautiful. "I'm not going anywhere, Diane," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "This is my home. You have no authority here." Her face hardened. The mask of civility dropped, and the raw, snarling ego was laid bare. "I knew you would be difficult," she hissed. She pulled out her pearl white iPhone, the screen already lit. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association. We have rules. You are in violation. I am calling the police, and they will remove you for trespassing on our land." And with that, she stabbed a finger at her screen and held the phone to her ear. It was the moment she had been building to her whole life. The ultimate Karen power move, calling the authorities on someone who was quietly minding their own business. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and prepared to enjoy the show. It was going to be a very, very satisfying 911 call. The call itself was a masterpiece of self-important melodrama. Diane, with the unwavering conviction of the truly delusional, spoke into the phone with an air of grave authority. "Yes, I need to report a trespasser at Pinnacle View Estates," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. She gave the address, the one for my private road that wasn't even on most public maps. "There's a man here, a vagrant, I believe, who has taken up residence in an abandoned community outbuilding. He is refusing to leave the premises." Yes, he's confrontational. I literally hadn't moved from my chair. "We are the representatives of the Homeowners Association. The property belongs to the community." She paused, listening to the dispatcher on the other end. "No, I don't need to verify ownership. I am the authority here. Just send a unit immediately to have him removed." The delicious irony was a 5-course meal. The dispatcher on the other end was Sharon, a lifetime resident of Argentum Falls whom I'd known since I was a kid. She was sitting in a state-of-the-art dispatch center that my company had built, using a system my company had installed. I could just picture her, rolling her eyes and typing up the call notes with a smirk. Diane hung up with a triumphant snap. "The police are on their way," she announced to me, as if I should be trembling in fear. "You have one last chance to leave before they get here." I just shook my head and took another sip of coffee. "I think I'll wait," I said. "I'm interested to see how this plays out." The 20 minutes we waited were tense and silent. The two landscapers looked increasingly uncomfortable, shooting glances at each other. The retired dentist seemed to be physically shrinking, trying to hide behind a birch tree. Diane's lieutenant stood ramrod straight, a loyal soldier awaiting the cavalry. Diane herself paced back and forth on my gravel, radiating righteous fury. Finally, the distant sound of a siren grew closer. A Serenity Falls Police Department SUV came carefully down the access road and parked behind the landscaping truck. Out stepped Police Chief Frank Miller. Frank was another one of my hires. A 25-year veteran of the Denver PD, he was a calm, formidable man I'd brought in to professionalize our small local force. He knew exactly who I was and exactly who owned what in this town. He walked past Diane without a word and came directly up to my porch. "Mr. North," he said with a slight nod. "Everything all right here?" Before I could answer, Diane stormed over. "Chief Miller, thank you for arriving so promptly. This man," she said, jabbing a finger at me, "is trespassing on HOA property. I want him removed and charged immediately." Frank turned his head slowly to look at her. He had a magnificent deadpan. "Ma'am," he began, his voice flat, "this is the McLeod cabin. It's situated on Northlight Assets Plot 7A. It's not, and has never been, part of your HOA." Diane's face went crimson. "That's absurd. Our bylaws clearly state, 'Your bylaws have no legal standing on property you don't own,'" Frank interrupted, his patience clearly wearing thin. "This is Mr. North's private land. In fact," he said, turning his head to look pointedly at her, her board members, and the landscapers, "you are all currently trespassing." The silence that followed was stunning. The landscapers immediately dropped the shovels they were holding and began backing away toward their truck. The dentist looked like he was about to faint. But Diane was not going to surrender. You're mistaken," she stammered. "I am the president of the board. I have documentation." "So do I," Frank said. He gestured back toward his SUV. "I have the official county plat map, which Mr. North's corporation was kind enough to digitize and provide to our department. It shows your property line ending about a mile that way." He pointed across the lake. "I suggest you and your associates leave now, before Mr. North decides he wants to press charges." It was in this moment, looking at Frank's implacable face, that the first crack appeared in Diane's armor of certainty. The faintest glimmer of a terrible, world-shattering thought began to enter her mind. Who was this Mr. North? Why did the police chief know him by name? How did he get a custom digital plat map into the hands of the police? She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, not as a vagrant in an old shirt, but as something else. Something she couldn't understand. And in that moment, she saw the calm, quiet smile on my face. And that smile terrified her more than any threat could. She didn't say another word. She turned, marched stiffly to her Cayenne, and drove away, spraying gravel in her wake. Her two board members scurried after her like frightened rats. The war wasn't over, but the decisive battle had just been lost, and she didn't even know who her enemy was. Not yet. The public humiliation at my cabin was just the opening salvo. Diane went home, defeated, but still ignorant. She likely believed I was just some well-connected local who had the chief of police in his pocket. She still didn't grasp the scale of her miscalculation. I decided it was time to educate her. It was time to pull back the curtain and show her who and what she had decided to pick a fight with. The revenge wasn't going to be loud or angry. It was going to be quiet, corporate, and absolute. It was going to be a systematic dismantling of every pillar of power she thought she had. My first move was made through Ben, the city manager. The following Monday morning, the Pinnacle View Estates HOA received a formal notice from the city of Serenity Falls. It stated that due to a pattern of harassment and attempted illegal property seizure originating from their address, the city's utility board was launching a full audit of their infrastructure agreements. The Pinnacle, you see, was an island. They had their own wells for water, but they were dependent on the Serenity Falls municipal grid for power, sewer, and fiber optic internet services owned and operated by my parent company, Northlight Assets. The notice informed them that their current service rates, which had been set years ago under the Old Town Charter, were provisional and subject to change. It also informed them that an inspection team would be on site within 48 hours to assess the compliance of their connections to the municipal sewer system, something that had never been done before. The second move was even more direct. My legal team, acting for Northlight Assets, sent a second letter. This one had nothing to do with my cabin. This letter informed the HOA that the land on which their opulent front gatehouse, security hut, and lavishly landscaped entrance stood was, in fact, not part of their 200-acre deed. A deep dive into the archives had revealed it was a separate parcel that had been leased to the original developer by the Argentum Mining Company back in 1985 on a 40-year term. A lease whose ownership had transferred to my corporation when I bought the mining company's assets, a lease that was set to expire in 6 months. The letter offered them two options. They could either vacate the property and remove the multi-million-dollar gatehouse at their own expense, or they could negotiate a new lease with Northlight Assets at the current, and much, much higher, market rate, a rate that would quintuple their HOA's annual budget. Suddenly, my abandoned outbuilding was the least of their worries. They were facing the prospect of losing power and internet, having their sewer lines dug up, and having their front gate torn down. The entire edifice of their exclusive community was built on infrastructure they didn't own and had taken for granted. This is when the real panic set in for them. I heard from Ben that the HOA held a frantic, closed-door meeting. The terrified dentist and the ambitious stockbroker finally found their courage. They realized Diane's personal vendetta had jeopardized their entire way of life. The fight was no longer about some rustic cabin. It was about their lights staying on. Diane was deposed as president in a brutal, no-confidence vote. But I wasn't finished. This wasn't just about punishing Diane. It was about fixing a fundamental problem in the community I had built. The final move was the most elegant. I had Northlight Assets make a formal, public offer to every single one of the 54 homeowners in Pinnacle View Estates. The offer was simple. We will buy your home for 110% of its current appraised value in cash. In return, the HOA would be dissolved, its covenants and bylaws erased, and the entire 200-acre parcel would be voluntarily annexed and integrated into the broader town of Serenity Falls. We would assume management of the roads and common areas, tear down the ridiculous gatehouse, and guarantee utility rates consistent with the rest of the town. For the homeowners, it was a golden parachute. They could escape the financial death spiral the HOA was in, cash out at a premium, and either leave or stay on as residents of Serenity Falls, free from Diane's tyrannical rule. It was an offer they couldn't refuse. Over the next 3 months, more than 80% of the residents took the buyout. The Pinnacle View Estates HOA ceased to exist. Its power was not just broken, it was liquidated. Diane, I heard, was one of the last to sell. Her mansion, once her castle, had become her prison. The "for sale" sign on her lawn was the white flag of her unconditional surrender. The town of Serenity Falls is quieter now, more whole. The old Pinnacle Enclave is just another beautiful neighborhood. The ridiculous gatehouse is gone, replaced by a lovely public park with a small boat launch that anyone in town can use. My cabin is still there, untouched. Occasionally, new neighbors will paddle by, and they'll look up at the old log structure not as a blight, but as a landmark, a symbol of the town's quiet, unassuming soul. They don't know the full story, but they know enough. They know that in Serenity Falls, the rules are about community and respect, not control and conformity. I never wanted to be a king, but I built a kingdom. And when a petty tyrant tried to conquer a small piece of it, she forced the king to finally put on his crown. Thanks for listening. I appreciate you all tuning in. I'll catch you on the next story.